so thanks everyone for joining the event. This is our first live webinar. A lot of folks were asking about Flowise and how to deploy that in production. I thought who better can explain that than Henry himself, who's part of the team who built Flowise. So that's awesome. It's a pleasure having you, Henry, with us and talking about these topics. We will start with a quick intro from your side, Henry, and then we can jump on to the presentation, and then towards the end we'll have Q&As. So without further ado, Henry, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'll start off with how to deploy Flowise to one of the cloud services, and then we'll go over some tips of how to allow multiple users to connect to one particular chat flow of Flowise. Then you can have multiple sessions, so each users will have an isolated sessions. So that is similar to real world chatbots. You want to separate interesting things that we recently released as well, which is load testing. So you can actually stress test the APIs, that how many APIs can Flowise handle. But of course, you need to keep your OpenAI tokens, all these costs in mind. You don't want to like put thousands of requests and then have a bill shoot up. So, but I'll go over into that in a later stage. So for now, I will try to share my screen and then go for the deployment step.
Awesome.
Screen, Windows. Um, oh, actually, let me share again. Cool. Can you guys see the documents of Flowise?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we are still working on documentations. I know it is still lack of a lot of informations, but we do have these deployment sections where we have these step-by-step guides, which kind of goes through how to deploy Flowise into one of the cloud services. And I think most of you guys have been using Render. Railway comes second, and then Rapid. So there are more cloud providers like AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, Google Cloud, Kubernetes. So these are more like technical setup. Today I'll go over DigitalOcean. Like out of all of these, DigitalOcean might seems the most easy one as compared to the others. But again, it is your own preferred choice. So feel free to use whatever that you feel like you're using or you're comfortable with or you have previous experience. But today I'm going to go over the DigitalOcean setup. But first, before we go into the setup, like I know a lot of you guys have been asking, once you deploy your flows on render and suddenly all of my flows is gone, then I have to rework all of my stuff. So that is true because some of these cloud services like render, railway, rapid, the memory are ephemeral. So as in once you deploy to render, and once the app got restarted after a redeploy, or once the app got shut down and then restart again, the whole thing will be wiped out, right? So to persist the flows that you have created on Flowise, so we have written a specific guide over here, persistent this. So we need to specify a disk for us to attach the database that Flowise is using, so that persists through every start, so that you don't lose your flow. So as you can see from the guide here, if you go over to your render dashboard, then you can see the disk sections over here. So you have to pay I think 7 USD per month, if I'm not mistaken, to access this feature. So it is a paid feature from render. And then after you have that, then you can just follow the step-by-step guide. First, you can specify, you have to mount the path to this value over here. So exactly, you just copy and paste, and then move over to the environment sections. Then you specify all of these environmental variables to be mounted on that path. So what happens here is that we are specifying all these paths that Flowise is storing to that particular path over here. So every time when the app restarted, everything will still stay the same, right? So yeah, it is just as easy as that, and you just click build, clear build cache and redeploy. So you should be able to persist your flow. So this is one of the highly asked questions from the folks that have deployed on render. Hopefully that resolved the issue. And then we have the setup guide for Digitalocean, which I will talk about today. So it is kind of same as well. Just follow the step-by-step guide. We have written quite clear instructions of how to do this. But for demo today, I can go over how to do this from the scratch. So first of all, you obviously you need to have an account on DigitalOcean. Then after you create an account, you will be brought into the dashboard. The first thing is to click create droplets from a drop down. So create droplets. And the whole process is very similar to render, right? So it is up to your choice whether you want to use render, you want to use DigitalOceans. They both very similar. And the first step, you want to choose the region that are mostly close to your users that you are serving. So for instance, I'm in Ireland, so I'll choose London for my case, but choose whatever region that you are based in. And so I will leave all of these default, so you can choose different operating system that you want your instance to be, but I'll just put it as default using Ubuntu. And then the instance size, right? So do you want like 1 gig of a CPU or 25 gig of SSD? So there are different plans, different instance size, but normally because Flowise is not running any extensive computational, behind the scenes, it is just calling the APIs. So we don't need like a very high, CPU or SSD to support, the Flowise instance. I think like for the basic $6 per month is more than enough. So as you can see, you have 1 gig of CPU and you have 25 gig of SSD disk and 1000 gig of bandwidth transferring. So it is more than enough. And yeah, so I'll choose the $6 a month. So for render, I think they have different pricing, but feel free to check out and compare which one you like to use. And create on DigitalOcean. So you can choose SSH key or you can choose password, right? For my case, I'll just use password for the demo. But I think overall, the recommended way is to use the key because this is much more secure than just a password. But for the demo sake, I'll just use a password for now. And the rest, I'll just leave it the same. I don't want to touch anything. So just to go over again, I just selected a data region, leave everything by default, select the most basic and cheapest plan, and put in my password, and that's it. So now if I create a droplet,
So Henry, a quick question. So
mhm.
on the computation side, um, let's say deploying for a few users versus, thousands of users or so. It was, is there some sort of feel to which one to use? The base version works in either cases, or would you suggest kind of bumping up a little bit based on the, let's say, X number of users?
Yeah, I don't have like a benchmark of which instance size that you should go for when you have certain users. Um, but I would say like if you choose the one that I just chosen, like the basic one, um, 100,000 of users concurrent requests to a Flowise is not a problem at all.
Oh, wow.
So that's the I think that satisfies a lot of the requests out there. I think all of the applications that especially like people are just still starting up within 100 and 1,000 requests, that is more than enough. But
Nice.
obviously, if you go for AWS, so AWS you have much more configurations that you can do. So maybe you can do auto scaling, but that's another whole different sections. So auto scaling is a feature from AWS where you can specify a threshold. Let's say if the incoming request is more than 1,000, then you want to automatically spin up another instance. So you now double your instance so that you can handle twice requests as what you previously handled. Maybe previously you were just handling 1,000 requests, but now you can handle 2,000 requests and upwards. So,
Hmm.
but these are much more technical to set up for for AWS auto scaling. So,
Hmm.
but that's another topic. I hope we can cover that in the documentations. But it's definitely something to improve in the future. But for now, DigitalOcean is more than enough to handle 100,000 requests per second. So
Awesome. Thanks.
right. Um, so we have created our second droplet. So I created the first one last time. So now what you need to do is that you need to get access into the droplets that you have created and to install Flowise and to run Flowise. So there is the whole sections of how to do that from the documentation here. So these are all the steps that we have just done. So this is where we are at right now, how to connect to a droplet. So if you are using Windows, you can follow this guide. If you are using Mac, you can follow this one. Since I'm using Windows, so the recommended way to connect to a droplet is to use PuTTY. So you can install PuTTY from the link over here, and what it looks like is something like this. So very, very ancient, very old style of the UI. Um, so if you go back to the DigitalOcean's page, so grab the IPv4 address of your droplet that you created, and what you need to do is just drop it in here, and that's it. And then you click accept, and then the login as root.
Henry, I believe I'm only seeing the browser.
Oh, okay, you're not seeing the. Mm, let me share again my entire screen this time. Can you see the party stuff? Hold on. Here?
Yes, now.
Okay, perfect. I will start over again. Um, so going back to the setup guide for Windows, first you need to install Party. Here I have it already. And then you just open up the applications. And here you will be prompted to enter the host name or the IP address. So what you need to do is to go back to your DigitalOcean dashboard and then grab this link. This is your IPv4 address that you have just deployed for your droplet. Copy that one and put it into here. So then you click open. That's it. And the username, the default username for DigitalOcean is called root. So you have to type in root. And then the password will be the password that I have created just now from my setup guide. And then I'll just enter it. And now I should be able to, let me try again. Okay, now I should be able to access to my droplet. And this is, so think droplet is like a virtual machines, like another computer of yours. And you are now in the, command line prompt of your virtual machine. So feel free to stop me if you have any questions or anything. So
Yeah, Henry, a couple of questions. First was you mentioned that DigitalOcean, the base version that we selected, can handle 100 to 1,000 requests per second or 100,000. I think that was a clarification folks were asking.
100 to 1,000 requests per second.
I see. Perfect. The other question was, what would be the difference in SSH? I think in calling that a
Yeah,
droplet.
I think SSH, like it is a key. So it is like a more secure way for you to access to and a password. But if you are using SSH key, you will have to so here's the guide. If you are using SSH key, you have to go to this SSH category over here and drop in your key so that only then you'll be able to connect to your instance. So it is like additional security layer for you to access to your instance. And this makes it harder for people to hack into your virtual machine as well. So that's why it is recommended to use SSH key.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I also have the link into the different setup guide for Windows and Mac. I think if we look at the Mac or Linux, you are using OpenSSH, so you don't actually have to install the party stuff. It's just the window. So for the Mac, you can just follow the guide over here. So this is the official guide from DigitalOcean. So it's pretty standard stuff.
Perfect. Thanks. And I guess there was another question about if there are any specific disks that fully address the data or flows wiping issue. I believe that was for render, but I
Mhm.
think you kind of went over the how to have a persistent disk, right? In that case, and also this DigitalOcean based deployment will also address that issue.
Exactly. So DigitalOcean, you don't actually have to worry about, persistent disk storage because when we create our droplets, so let's say we create again, you can see we have already built in storage for one of any of the instance that we created or any of the droplet that we created. So we don't actually need to purchase the additional storage. Yes, so it is built in already for instance.
Perfect. No, thanks. And for render, you showed how one could add the persistent storage, so that takes care of render issues as well.
Exactly. So um like for render, these sections address the persistent disk storage issue. So it's actually same as like using the like creating a DigitalOcean droplet with the built-in memory, right? But for
Mhm.
render, you have to buy that built-in memory, if that makes sense. So when it
Mhm.
comes with the free version, it doesn't have the built-in memory, so you have to buy the additional. But for DigitalOcean, because you are already paying $6 per month, so the memory is already built in for your instant or for a droplet.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks, Henry. I think that covers all the questions we had.
Cool. Right. So now that we have gained access to our instance, um, what we need to do next is to set up Flowise to have it running, right? So the easiest way to set up Flowise, as you can see from repository, we have different installation method. You can use npm, you can use Docker, you can also git clone the project and then do the yarn start. But Docker seems like the most easy way for these cloud services. So that's why our go-to choice is always to recommend people to use Docker. So first thing first, we have to definitely install Docker into our droplet. So I'm just going to copy paste whatever it is, here in this guide here. First, it is trying to install Docker. Then is trying to install Docker Compose. So there are two different things, but so we need to separate to get it through. Hopefully it doesn't take too much of time. But the rest of the setup is kind of the same. You install Docker, then you install Docker Compose, then you set the permissions to access to Docker Compose. The next thing is just clone the project and go to the Docker folder of Flowise and then modify some of the environmental variables. Then you'll be able to spin up your Docker Compose and have the Flowise running. Okay, now that our installation is finished, I'll move on to this third step and the fourth step. Perfect. So now installation of Docker and Docker Compose is finished. Now move on to the setup guide. Clone the project. And cd into the Docker folder and create an env file and specify all the path here. So you can simply just copy paste what we already have there. So okay, I have not created that one yet. I'll do again, copy and then paste it. Yes. And then if I do list all files, now I can see here is the file that I just created, right? .env. And inside that file, I have all the environmental variables specified here. So if you take a step back and then you look at render, right? So it is the same as you are specifying all these variables over here. It's just that, on the render, you can do it on a UI way. But for DigitalOcean, you have to gain access to an instance or a droplet and then do this step by yourself. So, but you have much more control of your instance. You can access all the things inside your instance. So it is a little bit more technical, but yeah. And I think so. That's pretty much all. The next thing that we can do is just spin up the Docker, Docker compose up -d, and right now it is pulling down the Flowise Docker image and spinning up the Docker container, and then hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, then you'll be able to open the Flowise applications from your DigitalOcean droplet.
And also, Henry, perhaps if folks would like to just get started quickly, they could use render and Railway, create flows, test it over there, and then save it. And for the deployment, then have something like DigitalOcean or AWS based deployment, right? So in that way, they can get started quickly and then have persistent deployment once they're ready to make it a production app.
Exactly. So I still think render is pretty good for productions as long as you have persistent storage. I think render is pretty good option because you don't need too much of a technical setup like as I'm doing over here. You don't need to install Docker. You don't need to spin up your own Docker container and stuff like this. It does that for you. So I think it's a pretty good choice to go with render overall.
Yeah.
I mean, $7 a month. $1 $1 more expensive than DigitalOcean is not too bad, right? So
That's right. Okay. Well, that's good to know actually, because initially a lot of complaints were that it was not persistent, but with this technique, now if it is persistent and if it is good for production, then that's quite nice.
yeah, it is. So if you compare the instance size or the specifications across render and DigitalOcean, I think like from DigitalOcean we can see I don't know 1 gig of we go over there. So 1 gig of CPU, 25 gig of disk, and 1000 gig of transfer. I think Render have pretty good offering as well. But yeah, you can compare over the different specifications.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now that we have successfully run the Docker Compose command, if we now back to our DigitalOcean dashboard, I'll just go back here. So remember, this is the droplet that we just created, right? So we copy that, and then now we want to append a semicolon and then 3000 ports to the address. Boom. So now we have Flowise up and running on DigitalOcean. Why 3000? Because Flowise by default is running on 3000 port. So you have to append this at the end of it. And yeah, so you can use Flowise right now, and you don't have to worry about your flows being gone because all the memory is persistent. Um, right. If we so if you want to update, so let's say if we push a new release and you want to update your droplet to the latest release. So what you can do is that you can first stop the Docker Compose. So if I do Docker Compose stop, so this will stop the applications. If I refresh, I won't be able to see my application again. And then once you stop the applications, then you can now update to the latest version by running this command, docker pull flowwise AI dash flowwise. So this will pull the latest image and latest release from Flowise. And then after you have put it, then you can, spin up again by using this command, docker compose up dash d. Um, so here's the catch, right? If I spin it up again, and if I refresh, so now my application is up and running. But the only thing is that how do you make it into your own URL? So you don't want users to access, first it is not secure because it is on HTTP, it's not HTTPS. And then second, you have this ugly IPv4 address there. And then third, you have this 3000 port, right? So normally you want users to access like something like demo, flowwiseai.com, like the full URL, right? How do you do that for DigitalOcean? So we have also written a guide here, but I won't go into that today because it is quite a lot of steps, and some of the steps are taking quite a bit of time. But just a high-level overview. First thing, we need to install Nginx. So this is to reverse proxy the port 80 to your port 3000. So port 80 is the default port for people to access to HTTP protocol, right? And you want to reverse that and redirect people to your 3000 port, which is the port that Flowise is operating on. So as you can see, because we are on the port 3000. And so that's why first thing we have to install the Nginx and then do the reverse proxy stuff. It is not too difficult. So mostly you can just copy paste what's already there and just follow the guide step by step. And the next thing after you have configured your reverse proxy, then you want to specify a domain name for that reverse proxy. So in this case, you can see here I'm specifying like demo.flowwiseai.com to the reverse proxy. So you can, if you have a domain name, you can just specify over here. And once that is done, you just follow the configuration stuff here, restart Nginx, And the next thing, or the last thing, is to configure your DNS record on one of your preferred choice. I think most of the people are using GoDaddy or something. GoDaddy, Namecheap. So I'm using Netlify in my cases. So this is a screenshot of Netlify. So you just create a record of a type and then specify the name and the value which will be from, so the value here will be your IPv4 address, which is essentially this one over here. So that's all about it, right? Just to recap. So first thing, I know this is a little bit confusing, but if you follow the guide step by step, I promise it will work. So first is to install the nginx, and then second is to configure the domain name for the nginx reverse proxy. And now that you have finished everything on, on this little black terminal window, you have finished everything. And then the last thing is to go over to your DNS provider and then create a new A record so that you can point it there. So you do have additional step that you can choose to use if you want to use the HTTPS encryption. Then you can follow the step-by-step guide to install the free HTTPS certificate as well. So we also attach a guide here to allow you to automatically renew your certifications. So you don't actually have to, like after every 30 days, you have to log into your terminal and then do the renewal. So this is the setup for DigitalOcean, but as you can see, it is all good when you install Docker, then you set up the applications. But when it comes to here, so some folks that might not be too technical may have difficulty understanding about reverse proxy, what is that, and how do you specify SSL encryptions. So back to Render, I think Render also offers a free domain. Not sure is it a free, but I think I've seen it somewhere that you can, oh here. So you can also specify your custom domain. So as you can probably see right now, you have this on render.com attached to the deploy URL. But if you want to specify the URL like the one that I was talking about here, demo.flowwiseai.com, you can actually add your own custom domain and then follow the guide from render as well. So it is up to you which way you prefer. If you are more like a UI type of guy and you don't want to mess up with the things about reverse proxy and stuff, I would say render is probably a better options. So I think any questions?
Yeah, Henry, I believe there was a question about reverse proxy. Is that
Mm-hmm.
also possible in PuTTY tool? Do you happen to know? Or
Reverse proxy. Um, so it is not something available from the party. I mean, obviously you need to have the party, and then so as you can see right now, this window is my party window, and
Mhm,
now I am in my virtual machines, right? So you set up all this reverse proxy stuff inside the party window, which is running your virtual machine, if it
mhm,
makes sense. Yeah. So it is
per-
not something that you can specify like if you open up new party, it's not something that you can specify over here or any configuration over here. No, it is after you have access to your virtual machines, then you'll be able to set up there.
Perfect. I hope that answers the question. In case if there's any follow-up on that, feel free to drop it in the chat. Second is, I believe there was about adding authentication to Flowise.
Mm.
for DigitalOcean, I believe this question.
Yep, good questions. So if I going back a step here, let me stop my Docker compose. Okay, so back to the DigitalOcean guide. We have all of this set up here, running up Docker and specifying the environmental variables. So the way that you want to protect Flowise instance, so let's say you want to have this username and the password, and what you needed to do. So here is the step here. You can also specify username, Flowise username, and Flowise password for your authorizations. And here, if you link it here, um, here's the sections where you can specify, your username and password. So why don't we try that? If I go to, I know it is very small, the windows, but I'm not sure how can I enlarge it. I don't think I can enlarge it, but
I think it's
hopefully,
pretty good size on my screen, Henry, so that should be
is
fine.
it? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
and I think someone mentioned Control Plus if that enlarges.
No, unfortunately it doesn't. So yeah, but um, I will continue to proceed with this one. So now I'm
Sure.
in my environable variable file. So I just specify my username, Flowise username, and user Flowise password equals to password. So that's all you need to do. Save it. So just to double check again if everything gets saved correctly. Yeah. So we can see the Flowise username and password, right? And now we just need to run the same command again, this command to spin up the Docker. So that's all you have to do. Just specify the environmental variables and then try to spin up Docker again. Now, if I try to refresh, so you can see that um, now I have these, windows that prompt me to enter my username and password, user, past, and now you have. I think that's hopefully that covers how do you set up authentications on DigitalOcean. It is similar to the other guides over here. In AWS, we are using Docker as well. So most of the steps, so let's say if you're using AWS, are kind of same. As you can see, like you are installing Docker, and then you specify the environmental variables, and then you spin up Docker. So it is kind of exactly the same, just a little bit different of how they operate, but most of
Hmm.
them are the same.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Henry. The other question is, what vector store would you recommend with DigitalOcean? So if someone were to use something locally like Chroma, how can that be
Hmm.
done?
I think currently Chroma only supports, if I look at documentation, they only support AWS deployment. So if you want to use Chroma, you will have to deploy Chroma onto one of the AWS instance, and then only you'll be able to connect, right? I think most of the people are still going for Pinecone because you just register an account on Pinecone, then you can set up and get up running. In terms of if you want your own hosted solutions, um, let me see. What are the available vector stores that we have? Okay, so you can use Flowise. So this will store locally into your droplet. So it will create um, a memory file or embeddings files in your own droplet. So similar to where you are storing all these flows, your databases, it will get stored at the same path where all of the chat flow or message is being stored. So I think Flowise can be used, that you don't need to set up another instance like Chroma. And then in memory is generally not recommended to go for productions because it is just in memory. So after let's say you shut down the applications, then you restart again, all the embeddings that get stored in the vector source will be gone, right? But if you are using Flowise, it will be persistent. So Flowise could be a good option. And then I have not explored OpenSearch or Quadrant for the. I mean, Supabase is one of the good choice as well. We have seen people spinning up, Supabase, because Supabase, as you know, open source product as well. You can easily set up Supabase and deploy to one of the cloud services. Then you can use it. But generally, yeah, I would recommend Feist if you want to have your own local vector stores.
Okay, thank you. Um, the next question is if one were to add a folder with files module, that's the one of the nodes available as a document output for vector storage. So that is possible with DigitalOcean since there is access to the file base. Is that also possible with Railway and Render?
So I think for railway, I'm not too sure. For render, I think you have access to your instance as well. So if you go to, so this is render. If you go to shell, you also have the ability to create an SSH key and then access to your instance. So in the other words, it is kind of same as DigitalOcean. You do have access to your file storage. So here you can see like the path here, and then if I list all, so this is where my Flowise is being deployed, right? So if I go to nano package.json, oh, okay, it doesn't have nano, but so render also have access to your file system, but the problem is that it is not easy, or at least I've not tried to, let's say, transfer something like maybe some file from your computer to the instance that render is operating at. Or likewise, if you want to retrieve the data from the render to your computer, I have not tried that. I'm not sure how easy it would be. But for DigitalOcean, I think it is pretty easy. You can use a file system like FileZilla or something. So FileZilla will be able to access both your computer and both the virtual machines that your DigitalOcean is deploying to, and then you can transfer file across the computer and things like that. So yeah, back to the questions, you can definitely use folder with path if you're deploying to DigitalOceans. But the only thing is that obviously you cannot specify like the path from your local computer because it will not be the same as the machines that you're deploying on DigitalOcean. You have to specify the path from your DigitalOcean virtual machines. So let's say example, if I cd out, if I make a new directory, let's say test data, cd into test, and then maybe you have some file.txt and then example, right? So now you have this file over here, and what you can do is that go to your applications and then go to folder with files and specify the path of this particular test folder. So I think what was the command to find out the path? CWD or something?
Yeah, we've PWD in Mac.
Yeah. So I think this is So you can do stuff like this, and then you will have access to your file system. And also, one of the things that we sometimes found out is that um, it is sometimes it doesn't work. Maybe you need a privileged access to your instance. Um, so we are also trying to add in more integrations to use like cloud storage like Google Drive, OneDrive, or Dropbox, so that you can actually use those services instead of using your own file system. Um, because like file system, it is kind of like a two-edged sword. You have access to a file system, but people who have access to your instance will also have access to a file system. So they can easily read your secret files or write some malicious code into your file system. So this you have to use it carefully.
Perfect. Thanks, Andre. A follow-up is on the folders with files, right? Right now, I think I looked in the source code. There are a few different formats that it detects when, a folder is connected. Is that
Mhm.
for all of the document loader types, or is it, I think still it's just a few different formats, right? PDF and JSON
Yeah.
and a few different things, right? So one has to probably keep in mind that it will probably just maybe detect those types and not do the other ones.
Exactly. The supported format types are the only ones that are supported for the other document loaders here. So for example, if we are supporting CSV, then obviously you can, load it from the folder, and then docs files and JSON file, JSON NL. So only the file types that are supporting in the current existing document loader.
Hmm. Perfect, thanks. Okay. There was an initial question about what happened to the JavaScript code section in the sharing embedding options? I believe it is still there, or is it something in works?
You mean exporting the JavaScript code from your flow, or
Perhaps that's the question. Yes.
yes.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, so that's definitely in work. Um, it is taking longer time because as we are adding more integrations, and then we still don't find a quick way to generate those code, because what we are doing right now is that we have to write the implementations, and then we have to write the code that is actually being. So imagine you have this generate code button over here, and if you click that, it will generate the code from the flow from you. So we actually have to write the piece of code for each integrations so that we can piece all of them together, and then send it to you as in the UI. Um, because of that, as we are adding more integrations, that kind of slow our iteration speed. So I think um, once we have cloud hosted version out, we will we'll start to implement that one. Um, so right now, I
Awesome.
think we almost have all the integrations from, well, not almost, but I would say 60-70% we are there from all the integrations from LangChain. And once we see like we kind of reach a more mature stage, and it wouldn't hinder our speed of development, then of course we want to give that ability to users as well. Um, but speaking of which, we do actually have this shared chatbot stuff here. I'm not sure if you guys have come across with this before, but some of the guys were asking um, how can I open these applications, chat applications, without having to create my own embedded version, right? So I think this is where you will be able to. So now if you just open the link here, then you'll be brought up to this page here where you can straight away chat with the chat flow. So this is one of the recent feature that we introduced as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. That's quite nice, actually.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Henry. So another question was, right now, let's say if one were to create flows on render and they decide to maybe deploy it on AWS or so, would the
Hmm.
flow IDs remain the same so that, let's say, if one were to connect from an external UI like Bubble or so, then they don't have to change the API link, or at least the last portion of it where it says chat flow ID.
Yeah. So you have two ways to do that. First is you can export all of the databases.
Mm-hmm.
This will put it into JSON file. So this including exporting your the flows, your messages, your credentials, your API keys. And then once you have the your applications running on AWS, then what you need to do, you can just load the database or import it back.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the easiest way. And if you want a more technical way, you can also go into the virtual machines and then get your database file. So it should be database.sqlite, and you can just use FileZilla or something to transfer that out. And then once you have applications running on AWS, and then transfer it back to AWS, if that
Okay,
makes sense. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, other quick question was, is Langsmith something supported or plan to be supported?
Plan to be supported, and we are looking at that. Yeah.
Awesome. Some quick questions, maybe looking at time. So there was a question about um, perhaps having documents embedded and then asking questions to be referenced from that embedding, but then also we give instructions to our maybe conversational QA bot saying, basically behave a certain way.
Hmm.
Um, Now, if that reference happens, is the answer going to be based on the first reference, or is it going to look through all of the documents? And maybe something quick about that, because certainly one could increase the K parameter, right? So it can reference 10 different source documents. Any tips, tricks? Some people even ask, should I do some sort of a fine tuning to talk in a certain way that my brand talks, right? So
Yeah.
how would you say retrieval versus fine tuning for any of that application?
Um, so we recently have a proof of concept that we are trying to use um, the embedding threshold. So as you know, we are retrieving all these embeddings from like the vector stores, and each one of them come back with a particular score, right? And technically, we can use that score to determine whether do we want to use the embeddings to build the response, or just to use the general, ChatGPT intelligence or whatever to answer that queries, right? But
Hmm.
from what we have found out, that is that the score doesn't actually, so the score cannot be the deterministic factor to decide whether to use embeddings or decide to use just a normal ChatGPT response, because um it is not accurate. So sometimes when I ask irrelevant questions, the score is much higher. And then sometimes if I ask something that is relevant to that, the score is much lower. And for our testing, it doesn't seem to be reliable. So I would say some of the tips and tricks that we can do. One is to increase the top K size. So as you have more um, uh, documents embeddings that fitting into the ChatGPT or whatever LMs, you have more context. Obviously, the answer returned from an AI will be better, but of course, you have the downside, which is you will cause the token to overflow. You will overflow the context size. That is something that you have to play around with to try to find the perfect number for your own use case. So each documents have different settings. So there's no golden rule to say, hey, you have to use like 5 or 4 or 3 or something. So it's something that you have to play around with. But by default, 4 is the best options recommended by LangChain. So by default, it is used as 4. So I also wanted to highlight there's another guide that we have written up here. It is called Web Scraping Question and Answering. Here I have a little bit tips and stuff. So the best thing to do. So I know some of you guys have came across where when you are chatting and suddenly the AI returned the response in another language. So one of the things that you can do to address that is to specify system message like this to explicitly say that, hey, only answer in English. So I found, so again, this is more like trial and error. So generally, I recommend people to increase or to play around with your top K size. So first thing, top K parameters. Second thing is to use metadata, if possible, so that you can narrow down to very specific documents or embeddings that you want to retrieve that improve the performance. And the third thing is to specify the system message to tell it to answer only in certain language and to behave in certain ways. I think that's the 3 tips that I can give to people. And of course, you can also play around with different chunks when you use a text splitter. Oh, again, if you are using a web scraper, it is recommended to use a HTML to Markdown text splitter because this has much more higher improvement than just a traditional recursive text splitter. So there are some, tips that you can play around with. So using different text splitter, using different top case size, system message. So there's no golden rule to say, hey, you have to do this and do that. It's just all around, trial and error.
Perfect. No, thanks a lot for that, Henry. Perhaps one last question, which is there a way to parameterize the API endpoints to feed in variable data? And what would be a way to extend the existing functionality, let's say for self-hosted inference endpoints hosted on Hugging Face?
Yeah, there's definitely plan to do that. We are also planning to open up all the endpoints. So let's say to create a chat message or to get all the flows so that you can integrate with other, your own internet APIs and things like that. So yeah, it is on the roadmap.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think we're already a few minutes over time. So really appreciate you joining and answering questions and walking us through deployment on Render as well as on DigitalOcean. So this was awesome. Thank you
Yeah,
so much again.